housed approximately 2,500 inmates, and I was at that facility about 11 years. Over the years, I achieved positions of corporal, sergeant, shift commander. Then after getting my degree from Tennessee State, I was moved into counseling and in case management, and then into the position of deputy warden at Turner Center and back at the main prison as a deputy warden. And then the position of warden, and then the position of assistant commissioner, deputy commissioner. And for a short period of time, I was commissioner of the Department of Corrections in an interim position until the governor could name a new commissioner. So I've had something like 37.5 years of experience with the Department of Corrections at all levels. Just about been there and done that. When you talk about corrections in Tennessee, I've been there. One of the biggest challenges that I faced during that period of time, I think, would be when the federal court ruled that the entire system was unconstitutional and would have to be reconstituted or remodeled to bring it into compliance with federal standards, as well as several mandates that was given the department by the court. It took us some years to do it, but I'm proud to say that we was able to, during my tenure, completely re-overhaul the Department of Correction to bring it into constitutional compliance. And that took some doing, and I'm very proud of that.
Very good. You know, in other words, you got almost all of the experiences that you could possibly have in the criminal justice system.
Yes, sir.
All the ranks and the whole thing.
Yes, sir. I have not skipped a rank. I started at the bottom and step by step came all the way to the top. And in addition to that, also at about midway, a little bit beyond midway in my correctional career with the state of Tennessee, I was contacted by the American Correctional Association, and they asked me if I would come on board as a consultant. And for about 16 years now, I've been a consultant with the American Correctional Association. And basically what I do in that capacity is whenever there's a system out there in these United States that's having problems in some area, whether it be food service, security, visitation, classification, whatever the situation might be, we are called upon to go to that unit, that system, and to look into the matter and to lay out for them ways that they may solve that problem. So I'm really a troubleshooter for the American Correctional Association and has been for the last 16 years, in addition to my 37.5 years with the Department of Corrections. So all in all, I've got better than 42 years in the business.
And so you bring all of that information, that knowledge and whatnot into a position as the sheriff. Let's talk about the sheriff's position. What is that position in Davidson County?
The sheriff's position is somewhat different than the position in the Department of Correction. It is basically an administrative position. As you know, when metropolitan government became metropolitan government, the sheriff lost the law enforcement powers that had been associated with that position for a number of many years. It became more or less an administrative position charged primarily with the responsibility of managing the jail and maintaining custody and control of those detainees that's sent to us by the courts.
And so you would not be involved in investigative kinds of operations as the police. So you said there's a distinction between the police department and the sheriff's office. Is that what?
There is a distinction between the sheriff's office and the Department of Corrections, in that the Department of Corrections is an agency charged with the responsibility of not only maintaining custody and control, but also administrating the Department of Corrections. And I've had both administrative experience as well as custody responsibility with the Department of Corrections. But with the sheriff's position, I will primarily be charged with an administrative responsibility, managing the jail. And I feel that my 42 years certainly says to anyone who care to look that I am most qualified, uniquely qualified, if you will, to be sheriff of Davidson County.
Why would you want to be sheriff of Davidson County? Let's talk about that.
Well, it presents a challenge. The position is open. I am qualified. I have the experience. And I want to make a contribution to the metropolitan Davidson County community. I've made contributions through my 37.5 years with the state, and I want to continue to do that. And I feel that I am uniquely qualified to be sheriff of Davidson County.
How large is the sheriff department when you think about the, I mean, in terms of its reach? Is it over Davidson County?
It has responsibility for the totality of those people that's arrested and sentenced to the jail by the courts. It has approximately 3,000 inmates that will pass through that system in the course of a year.
You know, one of the things that we found in dealing with some of the social issues associated with incarceration and et cetera, Mr. Bass, has been the large number of youth that we have incarcerated in the system. And I'm sure that you know a lot about that coming out of the system itself.
Yes, sir.
But what can we do, and what would you suggest that might be done in dealing with these issues?
I think that one of the things that we can do and must do as a society and as a community is that we must focus more on the front end of the criminal justice system rather than the tail end. And what I mean by that is that most of your behaviorists and sociologists and people that study behavior, they say that if you're going to make a change in an individual, that the best opportunity for you to do that is between the year 0 and 6 years of age. You have a great opportunity. You can just about make out of that person whatever you want to. But the older that person gets from that point on, the less your chances are of changing that individual. Because as we get older, we get set in our ways and our outlook on things, our folk ways and our mores. And if we wait until somebody's 18 years old or 20 years old, 25 years old, it's almost an impossibility to make a change in that person unless that person himself wants to change. But when you go back to 0 to 6 years of age, you can make out of that person basically whatever you want to, provide the programming and the activities there and available to that individual to participate. So I think that what we need to do to stem the tide of young people coming to our prisons and our jails is that we need, first of all, we need to have alternatives to locking people up, and we also need to deal with problem at an early age. You can go to the average teacher in Metro school system and talk to them, and they will tell you basically those kids that are at risk.
Very good. And of course, Mr. Bass, let me make preparations for this first commercial break, after which we'll come back and we'll give you an opportunity to continue this conversation. And of course, we'll be back with you following this short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Mr. Charles Bass, who is a candidate for the office of Sheriff of Davidson County, Tennessee. And of course, Mr. Bass, before we had our first commercial break, we promised that we'd give you an opportunity to talk about some of the issues that you believe to be significant and important in your campaign. And let's have you start doing that.
Thank you very much. I think that based upon what I have been able to determine in looking at the jail at this present time and talking to other people who is familiar with the operation of the jails, I think that the first thing that I would address, if God blesses me with this position, would be to look at the budget. The budget of the jail is approaching $53 million, and that compares to about $28 million 4 or 5 years ago. That represents a tremendous increase in the budget. On an average, about 20% increase a year. 20% increase in a budget is unheard of in my experience as a official with the Department of Correction. The average budget would receive an increase annually of 3 to 5%. Here's a budget that is being increased by 20 to 25% a year, and that's just not sustainable over the long haul. Somewhere along the line, someone is going to call a halt to that, and we're going to find ourselves in some difficulty. So I think that one of the first things would be is to get a handle on the budget, to get it in line with what is considered to be the norm, and operate within those parameters that's established. I think that would be the first thing that I would deal with. Also, I think that the second thing that concerns me, and that is the intake and classification. And when I talk intake and classification, I'm probably talking above a lot of people's heads.
Speak to it.
But basically what happens at intake and classification is the minute that the person is brought to the jail by the Metropolitan Police Department, I think that there has to be a very strong effort at determining who that person is. You have to know if that person have any problems whatsoever, and you must get to know overall as much as you can about that person before you put them in a cell and lock them up. And I say that because we have had 2 to 3 inmates over the last 2 to 3 years that has lost their lives while in custody. And oftentimes, when you look at a situation like that, it is because we did not have the adequate information. Information that I'm talking about is medical. Do you have a medical problem? Is there a social disease that can be transmitted to others? Have you been in an altercation with an individual and have internal injuries that's not known to us by just looking at you? Do you have an emotional problem? Do you have a mental problem? Are you under the influence of drugs or alcohol? You need to know all of this about that individual prior to putting them in a cell and locking them up, because if you don't know that information and you put that person in a cell and lock them up, there is a good chance that that individual may very well be deceased the next morning. So it's very important that you know that, so that you can deal appropriately with the individual who has just been brought to us by the Metropolitan Police. So I think that an excellent classification system is almost mandatory in operating a jail or a prison. And another thing that I think you have to have if you're going to successfully operate a jail is that you must create an environment for change to take place. There must be safety for both inmates and employees. There must be programming for those inmates who sincerely want to make a difference in their life. We have an obligation, I think, to create an environment for change to take place. If he has a drug problem, if he has an alcohol problem, or some other problem that relates to his being incarcerated, then I think we do need to have programming at that facility that enhances that individual making a positive change in his or her life if that's what they really want to do. So I think that programming are essential, and I think that heading that program should be the church itself, because I believe God to be the greatest change agent the world has ever known. So I certainly feel that a part of the overall programming must involve the church. It must be academics, it must be vocational, it must be work and leisure time action. All of these things must combine to create an environment for an individual to make a change, because I think we should never give up on people. I think that we need to work to bring that individual to a level of performance that he or she can take pride in. So I think that programming is essential. Another thing that I think is essential to the management of a jail or anything is that you must have a professional staff, a very good professional staff. I think you have to, first of all, try to recruit the best people you possibly can. I think you have to train them in policies, procedures, and how to do their jobs. And once you've done that, you have to hold them accountable for doing the job. In my years in correction, one of the biggest problems that we encounter as individuals and as staff would be allowing ourselves to interject our own ideas, our thoughts on the level of punishment of what ought to happen to an individual. And when you allow yourself to interject what you think or what you believe ought to be, rather than what the policies say or what the procedures say, then you're going to have people getting outside of those things, and you're going to invite in a federal lawsuit. If not a federal lawsuit, it's going to create problem within the inmate staffing, or it's going to create problem for another officer. The good old boy network just doesn't work anymore in prisons or jails. You must have competent, professionally, well-trained staff who will do their job and not let their personal emotions or anything interfere with them doing that job. The good old boy network must go, and I would insist on having a professional staff, but I do realize that before you can have a professional staff, you've got to recruit good people. You've got to train them. You've got to give them the proper tools to do the job with. Then you must hold them accountable to doing the job. Not the way they have always done it, but the way policy and procedure and the law says that it should be done. I think that is important. I think that another thing that I would be concerned about is the expanding community corrections. We have on average in the course of a year 3,000 inmates that come through our jail system. Some of those people are going to be there for a short period of time. Some of them will be there up to 6 years. I think that you must have an excellent work program in the community.
Let me, at this point here, Mr. Bass, interrupt you for our final commercial break, after which time we'll come back and deal with some of these other issues. And of course, we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. When we come back, we'll head back. Thank you, and welcome back to this final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Mr. Charles Bass, a candidate for the office of Sheriff of Davidson County. And of course, Mr. Bass, during this last segment, let's give you an opportunity to sort of summarize some of the things that you've been talking about and to include those things that we've not dealt with that you think our audience might be interested in terms of determining whether or not you all ought to be the candidate that they will select for the Sheriff of Davidson County.
Okay, thank you. I will continue. One of the other things that is underway as we speak, and that is the jail is moving towards accreditation. Now, accreditation is a set of standards, basically, that has been developed by the American Correctional Association, the organization to which I'm a consultant. They have established something like 443 standards that if you run a perfectly managed jail, you will do. You will be found doing these 443 things. And the jail has made application. They're moving towards accreditation, and I am a champion of accreditation. As a matter of fact, when I was with the Department of Corrections, I did have the opportunity to sit in on some of the early discussion before accreditation became a reality. I had the opportunity to sit down and talk with correctional professionals all over the country about the whole idea of accreditation and how it would play with the states. And I am very proud that we, out of those discussions, came to standards and the establishment of the American Accreditation Association of Standards for correctional institutions and jails. And I would continue to support accreditation for our jail system. I think it is the best thing that has happened to our jails and our prisons since sliced bread. So I think it's a very good thing, and I would continue to champion accreditation. I think that the jail must also have a continuing and ongoing planning document, a document that includes both short-range and long-range planning. Now, if you go down and look at all of the buildings that falls under the heading of the criminal justice system for Metropolitan Davidson County, you will find that some of the buildings are old, dilapidated, some of them are fairly new. But I believe that good planning needs to include short and long range in order to avoid the federal courts or somebody coming in and saying, you must do this now, because to build a jail is no small undertaking. It's a pretty expensive thing. So if you've got a planning document that looks at each one of the buildings and over a period of years amateurize them to where we know when that building is no longer going to be usable, then we can share that information with the mayor's office, we can share it with the correction professional, the budget officer for metropolitan government, and we can begin to make plans to replace that building at an appropriate time, and then it will not be such a shock to the budget of metropolitan government or to the taxpayers of the county. So I think that we do need to have an excellent planning document. I think that we also need to have a good management philosophy, both for staff as well as my immediate administrative staff. And my basic management philosophy is that, first of all, we must be professional at all times. Regardless of what the circumstances is, we must operate as professionally as we possibly can in any type of a situation. I think that also that it's incumbent upon us as managers, both middle and upper management, to make sure that we are always firm, fair, and consistent with both the employees as well as the inmates themselves, because it's been my observation under all kinds of circumstances that if you treat people right, 99% of them will go along with your program. My observation has been that if you treat people well, it will come back in many, many times over in dividends. I have been caught up in riots where I was involved in the riot to the extent that I was back there where the riot was occurring. But it was not no time that I fear for my life, because the inmates,
The relationship you think
the
that you had.
relationship, because most people just want to be treated fairly. And that's true in just about any way you want to slice it. Most people just want to be treated fairly. And my management philosophy is that you treat people as they allow you to treat them. You only mistreat people when you have to. And that's called for and written in policy and procedure. But beyond that, try to treat people like you want to be treated, and you will find that it works well in the prison population just as well as it does
golden
out
rule.
here. It's the golden rule. If you do that, you're going to be fine. And I think that that, along with another issue that came up along the campaign trail that I would want to address. I've talked to people from Sudan and from the Hispanic community, and what they tell me is that when they run afoul of the law and find themselves downtown for whatever the reason, that oftentimes their case is not processed in a timely manner because of the language barrier. And that's not good. I think that what we need to do is to go into the Sudanese community, go into the Hispanic community, any other community that does not speak English. Get into that community, try to recruit and train and bring on board people from those communities, so that when somebody who is from that community shows up in jail, we have an excellent person already trained to deal with their problem when they get there.
And of course, let me interrupt you here, Mr. Bass. We're running out of time, but we certainly appreciate you bringing that excellent information to us today. And let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.